There's a version of your life you keep returning to, a different city, a different career, maybe even a different version of you. You're not unhappy exactly, but something keeps pulling you away, into a life you haven't lived, a self you haven't become. And the question you never say out loud is, what does it mean that I can't stop thinking about it? It usually happens in quiet moments, in the middle of a meeting you don't care about, on a Sunday afternoon that should feel peaceful, right before you fall asleep. Your mind slips, and suddenly you're somewhere else, a different apartment, a different morning routine, a different conversation with a different kind of person. The fantasy is specific. It's not just vague escape. You can almost feel the texture of that other life. And when you come back to this desk, this room, this version of things, there's a heaviness. Not quite sadness, not quite regret, something quieter than both. Psychologists have a name for the emotional experience underneath this. It's called identity foreclosure anxiety. The quiet fear that in becoming who you are, you permanently close the door on who you could have been. But that's only part of the picture. Because research in personality psychology, particularly the work of Dan McAdams on narrative identity, tells us something important. The self is not a fixed object, it's a story. And when you keep imagining alternate lives, you're not fantasizing, you're drafting. Your mind is writing versions of a self it hasn't yet integrated. Here is what this is not. It is not ingratitude. It is not immaturity. It is not a sign that your life is wrong. What it actually is a sign that parts of your identity are still waiting to be acknowledged. Psychologist Tori Higgins introduced a framework called self-discrepancy theory. It describes the gap between three versions of you: the actual self, who you are right now; the ideal self, who you want to become; the ought self, who you think you're supposed to be. When these three selves don't align, the mind doesn't go quiet. It generates friction. It produces longing. It creates recurring daydreams about roads not taken. This isn't a malfunction. It is your psychology's way of saying something in you hasn't been given a place yet. To understand why the brain does this, you have to understand something called the default mode network. It's the part of your brain that activates when you're not focused on an external task, when you're idle, when you're drifting, when the world gets quiet. And what does it do in that space? It simulates. It runs mental models of the alternate career might not be about the job. It might be about being seen doing something that feels like you. The fantasy is a letter. Read what it's actually saying. Psychologist Erik Erikson described identity as something that is never fully resolved. It keeps asking to be revisited. Sometimes the pull toward another life isn't about your circumstances. It's about an aspect of your identity that hasn't found expression in your current one. These are two different problems with two very different solutions. One asks you to change your life. The other asks you to change what your life contains. Learning to tell them apart is one of the most important things you can do. Carl Jung wrote about what he called the shadow, the parts of the self that get suppressed, not because they're dark, but because they don't fit the role you've been playing. The unlived life often lives in the shadow, and the way to stop it from haunting you is not to analyze it endlessly, it's to give it a door, a small, real, concrete expression, the version of you that wants to write.